3 words. From his crying maid made the Mafia boss end. His engagement, but why? The water was cold enough to stop my thoughts before I could finish having them. I knelt in the metal tub with my wrists bound behind my back, rope biting into the crease of my elbows, and I told myself the same thing I had told myself 3 years ago, the first night I walked into the Valenti estate carrying a forged letter and a stolen name. Stay quiet, stay small, survive until morning. Only this time, morning felt very far away. Don Severino Valenti crouched in front of me the way a man crouches in front of something he has already decided he owns. Black suit. Sleeves rolled to the forearm, tattoos disappearing into the cuff. A face I had polished silver in front of for 3 years, without ever once being permitted to look at it directly, and now I could look at nothing else, because looking away felt like the last mistake I would ever make. Behind him, near the open mouth of the garage, Bianca Volterra stood in white silk, with one hand pressed to her lips, watching her fiancé study his maid the way other men study a fire they started themselves. I want to tell you I was brave. I want to tell you that when Enzo Benedetti dragged me out of the laundry wing an hour earlier, dropped 3 photographs on the folding table, and said her, I met his eyes and laughed. I did not laugh. I stood very still and felt the floor of my life tilt sideways, because I had spent 3 years making sure nothing about me was interesting enough to photograph, and someone had photographed me anyway. Severino had not raised his voice once. That was the part that frightened me most. Men who yell are men who still have something to lose. He had simply looked at the photographs, looked at me, and said, "Come with me," in the same tone he used to ask for his whiskey. 2 fingers, no ice, 1 drop of water to open the spirit. I had been pouring it that way since my 2nd week in his house, because I noticed things. It was the only skill I had ever been allowed to keep from my old life. Noticing. Numbers that didn't balance. Signatures that leaned the wrong direction. A ledger entry dated a Sunday when the office had been closed for a funeral. I had been noticing the Valenti household's private accounts for 11 months. Not because anyone asked me to. Because my father had taught me how, before a set of falsified invoices very much like these ones put a bullet in the back of his car outside a bank in Palermo and left his 11-year-old daughter believing, incorrectly, that being invisible was the same thing as being safe. It is not the same thing. I have known that since I was 11. I had simply hoped I would get to choose the night I stopped being invisible, instead of having it chosen for me in a garage that smelled like gun oil and cold concrete. "Tell me you didn't do it," Severino said. Not a question. An opening he was leaving for me, the way you leave a door unlatched for someone you are not yet ready to admit you want to walk through. I could not answer. The tape was still over my mouth. He had put it there himself, hands steady, eyes somewhere I couldn't follow. And some small, foolish part of me had cataloged even that. How careful he'd been not to catch my hair in the adhesive, as if gentleness and cruelty could occupy the same set of hands without either one apologizing for the other. Bianca's voice cracked the silence first. "Severino! What is this? What is she?" Not who. What? As if 3 years of folding his shirts and memorizing his whiskey had made me a category instead of a person. He didn't turn around. "Evidence," he said. "Or a woman who is about to prove Enzo wrong. I haven't decided which." My heart did something complicated at that. Not hope exactly. Hope would have been foolish, and I have not been able to afford foolish since I was 11 years old. But something adjacent to hope, something that recognized in his voice a man who was still doing arithmetic, still leaving room for a different sum. He reached forward. I felt his fingers at the corner of the tape, unhurried, and some old animal part of my brain flinched anyway, because gentleness from a dangerous man is its own particular kind of terror. You cannot trust it, and you cannot stop wanting it either. He tore the tape away in one clean motion. I gasped water and cold air together, and for one full second I said nothing at all, because I was deciding, really deciding, the way you decide whether to jump. Whether the 3 words sitting behind my teeth for 11 months were going to save my life or end it. Behind him, Bianca took one step closer, her heels sharp against the concrete, and something in that sound, measured, unhurried, a woman walking toward a scene she still believed she controlled, made the decision for me. It was Bianca, I said. The garage went silent in a way that had a texture to it, a silence with weight, the kind that exists only in the half second before something in a room breaks permanently. Severino did not move, but I watched his eyes leave my face for the first time since he had crouched in front of me and travel slowly over his shoulder to the woman in white who was 6 weeks from becoming his wife. I want to tell you what those 3 words meant. I want to tell you what I had found in 11 months of quiet arithmetic, hidden in a ledger no one thought a maid could read. But first, you need to understand how I came to be kneeling in that water at all, because nothing about that night was an accident, least of all me. Subscribe. If you are already leaning forward, if some part of you needs to know what happens when a man like Severino Valenti turns around, a quick subscribe keeps the darkness coming, because this story does not stop here, and neither will I. Before I tell you about the water, I have to tell you about the silence I built to survive it. I arrived at the Valenti estate on a Tuesday in early autumn with a letter of recommendation that did not exist, from a household that had never employed me, signed by a woman I invented on a train somewhere outside Florence. My real name is Isolde Moreau, and that much, at least, I kept, because a person needs to hold on to one true thing, or she stops being able to find her way back to herself. Everything else about my arrival was constructed. I had spent 4 years training as a forensic document examiner, contracts, provenance, the small tells that separate an authentic signature from a practice forgery, before my father's murder taught me that the skill which should have protected our family had instead marked us as a liability to the people who profited from what he found. After that, I did not want to be known for what I could read in a column of numbers. I wanted to be unremarkable. A maid is unremarkable. A maid is furniture with a pulse. I chose the Valenti household on purpose, not because I loved danger, because the Valenti financial network intersected, 3 tiers removed, with the exact chain of shell accounts that had funded the operation that killed my father. And I had spent 6 years learning that the only way to find out who actually pulled that trigger was to get close enough to the paperwork to watch it breathe. I did not expect Severino Valenti to notice me. Powerful men rarely notice the person holding the tray. But he noticed everything. The way a man who has survived 3 assassination attempts learns to notice everything, and within a month he had cataloged my habits with the same quiet precision I had spent my life applying to other people's ledgers. He noticed I never flinched at gunfire. He noticed I poured his whiskey exactly right on the second try, and never wrong again after that. He noticed the scar on the inside of my left wrist, thin and old, and he never asked about it, which frightened me more than if he had. A man who does not ask questions is a man who is choosing, deliberately, to let you keep your secrets a little longer, and I understood by then that Severino Valenti did not give anything away for free. I told myself the attraction I felt for him was simply proximity. Danger has a gravity to it. You spend enough hours in a house where death is discussed over breakfast, the way other families discuss the weather, and eventually the person at the center of that danger starts to look less like a threat and more like the only solid ground in the room. I was wrong to tell myself that. It was not simply proximity, but I did not have the luxury of examining what it actually was, because 11 months ago, while auditing a set of shipping manifests I had no business reading, I found the first inconsistency, a routing discrepancy in a consignment logged as textiles, valued at 4 times what raw fabric has ever been worth in the history of that particular trade route. I kept looking. That is the part of me that never left the 11-year-old girl in Palermo. I kept looking, and looking, for 11 months, in stolen minutes between polishing silver and turning down beds, cross-referencing dates against a mental ledger I built and rebuilt every night before sleep, because I did not dare write any of it down where someone could find it. What I found was this. Someone inside the household was feeding shipment schedules and safe house locations to the Conti family in exchange for a guarantee that when Severino's marriage to Bianca Volterra consolidated the 2 largest territories in the north, the Contis would be quietly, permanently cut out of the profit sharing they believed they were owed. It took me 4 months to understand that the person selling that information was not trying to hurt the Valenti Empire. She was trying to save her own family's stake in it by making sure the merger collapsed before her fiancé's signature made it permanent, because a fiancé who is also secretly drowning in debts inherited from a father who gambled away half of the Volterra fortune has every reason in the world to want a wedding that never quite happens, provided someone else takes the blame for stopping it. I am telling you all of this now, out of order, because you deserve to know that the woman kneeling in that tub was not a woman caught by surprise. I had known for 4 months that Bianca Volterra was the leak. What I had not known, what I could not have known, not until the moment Enzo Benedetti dropped 3 photographs of me on a folding table, was that she had already decided I was close enough to catching her that I needed to be removed first. She was clever about it. She used real photographs, me at the harbor, meeting a contact who worked for a maritime insurer, a meeting that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with confirming a manifest date. And she built a lie around true images, which is the oldest and most effective forgery there is. I would know. It is the exact technique I had spent 4 years learning to detect in other people's work. I had simply never expected to have to detect it in my own defense, with my hands bound and my voice taken from me, in front of the one man whose good opinion I had spent 3 years pretending I did not want. Severino did not speak for a long moment after I said her name. He simply turned his head, the way a man turns to look at weather rolling in off the water, calm on the surface and calculating everything underneath. "Say that again," he said. Quiet. Not a threat. Worse than a threat. Genuine attention, the kind he had never once given me in 3 years of pouring his whiskey exactly right. "It was Bianca," I said again, my voice raw from the tape and the cold. "Not me. I have proof. 11 months of it. If someone will until my hands, I can show you where it's hidden." Bianca's laugh came out too fast, too bright, the laugh of a woman who has rehearsed disbelief because she suspected somewhere in the last 4 months that this moment might eventually arrive. "She's lying, Reno. Look at her. She's soaked and terrified, and she'll say anything to survive the next 5 minutes." "She has said 3 words," Severino said, still without looking at his fiancée. "You have said considerably more than 3, and none of them have answered the question I actually asked." I watched something in Bianca's face rearrange itself, quickly, the practiced adjustment of a woman recalibrating a lie in real time. I had seen that exact recalibration before, in the eyes of a man testifying in a Palermo courtroom about my father's shipping records, a man who had also believed, right up until the final second, that confidence could substitute for truth. It cannot. It never has. Confidence is simply truth's cheaper, faster cousin, and it collapses the instant someone with real evidence walks into the room. I was that someone. I had simply been kneeling in cold water instead of standing. "Cut her loose," Severino said to Enzo. who had been standing near the black Rolls-Royce with the stillness of a man waiting to see which way the wind decided to blow before committing his own opinion to it. Enzo hesitated. "Boss, the photographs are real photographs of a real meeting that I have not yet asked her to explain," Severino said. "I intend to. After she is no longer sitting in a tub of water, I put her in on the word of a woman who has just spent 30 seconds arguing with a fact instead of denying it. It was, I would later understand, the exact moment Bianca Volterra lost, not the moment I said her name. The moment Severino noticed that her first instinct had been to attack my credibility rather than defend her own innocence. A tale so simple that any forensic examiner, any daughter of a murdered accountant, any woman who had spent 4 years learning to read the space between what people say and what they are actually protecting would have recognized it instantly. Enzo cut the rope. My hands came free with a rush of pins and cold, and I did not reach for Severino, though every instinct in my body wanted to, because 3 years of invisibility does not undo itself in a single garage on a single night, no matter how badly the person crouched in front of you might, impossibly want it to. "Where," Severino said, "is your proof?" "Sewn into the lining of my winter coat," I said. "Second closet, west hallway. I photographed the original ledger pages on a phone I bought with cash and have never connected to any network in this house. I have dates, routing numbers, and 3 wire transfers that trace back to a Conti-controlled account in Lugano." Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. The particular respect a careful man reserves for someone who has just proven herself more careful than he assumed a maid could ever be. Bianca's hand found the door frame of the garage, steadying herself, and I understood, watching her, that she had not yet realized how thoroughly the ground beneath her had already given way. She was still calculating an exit. I recognized that calculation too. I had made it myself every day for 3 years. "Get her the coat," Severino said, and for the first time that night, he looked at me. Not as evidence, not as a maid, not as a category Bianca had tried to reduce me to, but as a woman who had just handed him, without flinching, the exact thing every powerful man fears most: proof that the person closest to him had been lying to his face for months, while he congratulated himself on missing nothing. I had missed nothing either. I had simply been waiting for the one night when telling the truth would finally cost less than staying silent. They gave me dry clothes and 30 minutes alone in a guest room before Severino sent for me again, and I spent every one of those minutes deciding how much of the truth I was actually willing to hand him. 11 months of quiet arithmetic is not a small thing to surrender. It was the only leverage I had ever built for myself in that house, the only proof that invisibility had been a strategy and not a surrender. Handing it to Severino Valenti meant handing him, effectively, the whole shape of who I really was. Not a maid who had gotten lucky with a ledger, but a trained examiner who had walked into his household with a false name and a 6-year vendetta running quietly underneath 3 years of polished silver. He met me in his study, not the garage, which I understood even then as its own kind of statement. The garage was where he kept people he suspected. The study was where he kept people he was choosing, carefully, to trust. My coat lay across the back of a chair. He had not opened the lining himself. He was waiting for me to do it, which was, I would learn, entirely characteristic of him. Severino Valenti did not take what he could ask for, not from anyone he had already decided mattered. I unpicked the seam with a letter opener from his desk and drew out the phone. The folded photographs of ledger pages, the handwritten index I had built over 11 months in a code only I could read. I laid all of it on the desk between us like a woman laying down cards she had spent years learning to hold close. "You could have brought this to me 11 months ago," he said. Not an accusation, a genuine question, the kind that wanted an honest answer more than it wanted a comfortable one. "You'd have asked how a maid learned to read a shipping manifest," I said. "And then you'd have asked why she was looking for one in the first place." I wasn't ready to answer either question yet. "Are you ready now?" I told him. All of it. My father, the falsified invoices, the car outside the bank in Palermo, the 11-year-old girl who decided that being unseen was the only kind of safety left to her. I told him about the 4 years of training I had buried under 3 years of silver polish, and the 6 years of patient, methodical searching that had led me, of all the households in Italy, to his. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without interruption, cataloging me the same way he had cataloged my habits for 3 years, except now I was handing him the catalog myself instead of letting him build it in secret. "Your father's killer," he said when I finished. "Do you know the name?" "Not yet. I know the money. The money leads to a name eventually. It always does." I met his eyes. "It's the one thing I learned from watching my father work before I ever learned it for myself. Numbers don't lie. People do. You just have to be patient enough to let the numbers talk long enough to catch them at it." Something shifted in the study then, some recalibration in the space between us that had nothing to do with betrayal or ledgers, and everything to do with two people who had each spent years constructing a version of themselves careful enough to survive the world they were born into. "Bianca is under guard," he said. "She will not be leaving the estate tonight, or any night soon, until I understand the full architecture of what she built with the Contis. Enzo is already tracing the Lugano account." He paused. "I owe you an apology I do not know how to give correctly, because I have never had to give one to someone who works in my own house." "You don't owe me an apology," I said, which was not entirely true, but I had learned long ago that survival sometimes means letting a powerful man keep a small piece of his pride, provided he has already given you the larger thing you actually needed, which in that moment was simply to be believed. "I owe you something," he said. "I have not yet decided what, but I find I am no longer interested in deciding it quickly." It was, I would understand only later, the exact moment the engagement to Bianca Volterra died, though neither of us said so aloud that night. Some endings do not need to be announced. They simply arrive, quietly, in a study at 2 a.m, in the space between a woman's true name and the moment a dangerous man finally, deliberately, chooses to hear it. Who have stopped pretending? The estate changed after that night in ways that had nothing to do with locked doors or reassigned guards, though there were plenty of both. Bianca remained confined to the East Wing under Enzo's watch, while the Lugano account unraveled thread by thread, and I remained exactly where I had always been, except that Severino no longer pretended not to look at me, and I no longer pretended not to notice him looking. He asked me, 3 days later, to review a separate set of accounts, legitimate ones this time, the estate's shipping insurance, because, he said, he was curious whether my particular talent extended past catching liars into catching honest mistakes as well. It did. I found 2 of them within an hour, small clerical errors that had cost the estate a modest sum over several years, the kind of thing no one notices until someone finally looks properly. "You've been wasted on silver polish," he said, watching me circle the second error in red ink. "I chose the silver polish," I said. "It kept me alive long enough to find what I was looking for." "And now that you've found it?" I did not have an answer for that yet, and he did not push me for one, which was its own kind of gift from a man who was not, by nature or profession, inclined to leave anything unresolved. The pull between us had been there since the first month, buried under 3 years of careful distance, and now that the distance had collapsed, There was nowhere left for either of us to hide from it. He found reasons to keep me in the study past midnight. I found reasons to bring him coffee myself instead of sending it up with someone else. We were, both of us, too controlled to call any of it what it was, until the night he caught my wrist as I set the coffee down and turned it gently to look at the old scar there. "You never told me how you got this," he said. "A different bad night. A long time before this one. Will you tell me eventually?" "If you keep asking instead of demanding," I said. "Yes, eventually." He did not let go of my wrist. I did not pull it away. The study was quiet except for the low sound of the estate settling around us, and for a long moment neither of us moved, both of us balanced on the same edge. A woman who had spent 6 years learning not to want anything she could not verify first, and a man who had spent his whole life learning not to want anything he could not control. "I am going to kiss you," he said, which was, I understood even then, its own kind of respect, not an assumption, an announcement, a door held open rather than a door forced. "I know," I said, and closed the distance myself, because I had spent 3 years being invisible, and I was done, finally, with being the one who waited. It was not soft. It was not careful, the way his hands had been careful with the duct tape that first terrible night. It was the kind of kiss that comes from two people who have spent months cataloging each other in secret and have finally run out of reasons to keep the catalog private. His hand at the back of my neck, mine fisted in the front of his shirt, 3 years of careful distance burning down to nothing in the space of a single held breath. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, breathing hard, and said low, "I have wanted to do that since the second week you worked in this house, when you poured my whiskey exactly right and did not ask me a single question about why my hands were shaking that night." "I noticed your hands were shaking," I said. "I have always noticed everything. It is the only skill I was ever allowed to keep." "Keep it," he said. "I intend to spend a great deal of time being grateful for it." I will not describe everything that followed that night in this study, except to say that some things are better left in the privacy where they happened, that what passed between us afterward was slow and certain, and entirely unlike the version of intimacy either of us had learned to expect from people who live surrounded by danger. It was not a claiming, it was a choosing, made twice by two people who had each spent years deciding no one was safe enough to choose. We were wrong about that, both of us, and by morning neither of us wanted to be right about it again. Enzo returned from Lugano 9 days later with a folder thick enough that he set it on Severino's desk with both hands, the way you set down something that has already changed the shape of the room before anyone opens it. I was in the study when he arrived, which itself told you everything about how far things had shifted in 9 days. The maid who used to knock twice and wait now sat across the desk from Severino Valenti, as a matter of course, a second set of eyes he had come deliberately to rely on. "The account traces to Raphael Conti directly," Enzo said. "Not a cutout, not a cousin, him. Bianca has been feeding him shipment schedules for 14 months in exchange for a guarantee that when your marriage went through, her family's stake in the northern routes would be protected from the renegotiation you'd planned." "I never planned to cut the Volterras out," Severino said, quiet and dangerous in a way I had learned to recognize as the calm, before he made a decision someone would not survive. "She thought you would," Enzo said. "Her father's debts made her desperate enough to believe it before you'd said a word. And once she started feeding Conti information, she couldn't stop, because stopping meant confessing, and confessing meant losing everything the information was supposed to protect in the first place. I understood that particular trap better than either of them, though I did not say so aloud. I had spent 6 years inside a version of it myself, one lie requiring a second lie to protect it, until the architecture of deception becomes so load-bearing that tearing any part of it down threatens to collapse the whole structure of a person's remaining life. Bianca had simply built her structure out of fear instead of grief, and mine, at least, had never asked anyone else to bleed for it. "There's more," Enzo said, and this was the part of the folder he had waited to hand over last. 14 months ago, Conti made contact with a second household, one with financial ties to a shipping insurer in Palermo. He was buying information about anyone connected to a decade-old embezzlement case, a case that ended with an accountant dead outside a bank. My chest went very still. "My father," I said. Enzo looked at me properly for what might have been the first time since the night in the garage. "Conti didn't order the killing, but he bought the falsified invoices that made it look justified afterward, from the same broker who later sold him access to the Valenti shipping routes through Bianca. It's the same network. It's been the same network the entire time. 6 years of patient searching, and the thread had simply walked itself into the one household in Italy where I happened to be standing when it finally surfaced. I do not believe in fate. Not really. Not after everything my training taught me about how rarely coincidence is actually coincidence. But I sat in that study and felt, for the first time since I was 11 years old, that the world had finally, accidentally, done me a single favor. Severino watched me absorb it, and I watched him decide something, the same careful arithmetic he had done in the garage 9 days earlier, except this time the sum he was reaching had nothing to do with whether to trust me and everything to do with what he intended to do about it. "Raffaele Conti dies for this," he said. "Not for Bianca's information, for your father." That decision was made the moment Enzo said Palermo, and it does not require your permission, but I am telling you anyway, because you have earned the right to know exactly what is coming. I felt something in my chest loosen that had been clenched shut since I was 11 years old. Not relief exactly, because relief implies an ending, and I understood we were not at an ending yet. Something closer to recognition. The particular weight of finally being believed by someone with the power to act on it. "There's one more name in the folder," Enzo said, quieter now. "The broker who sold Conti the falsified invoices in the first place. The one who actually built the paper trail that framed your father." "Who?" I said, though some old, exhausted part of me had already begun to guess. "Let's talk. When justice finally arrives for something you buried years ago, does it heal the wound, or does it just prove the wound was real the whole time? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every one of them, and I want to know if you believe closure is even possible after something like this." "Giulia Ferretti," Enzo said. The name meant nothing to me directly, but it meant something to Severino. I watched his jaw tighten, watched a decade of careful business relationships rearrange themselves behind his eyes. "She's handled document authentication for half the northern families for 15 years. Contracts, provenance, insurance claims. She's the person everyone trusts, precisely because no one questions a woman who spends her life making sure other people's paperwork is legitimate. She's exactly the kind of person who would know how to fake it," I said, and something cold settled over me, the particular chill of watching a decade-old grief acquire a face. "I trained under 3 examiners when I was learning the trade. One of them worked in the same regional network Ferretti did. I never met her directly, but I would have crossed paths with her work more than once without knowing it. She built the false invoice chain that implicated your father," Enzo said. "Sold it to whoever paid for it. In this case, a shell company 2 layers removed from Conti. Your father's death wasn't personal to her. It was a service she provided, the same way she provided it to Conti 14 months ago when he needed cover for the northern routes." I sat with that for a long moment. I had spent 6 years imagining the person who destroyed my family as someone who hated us specifically. a villain with a motive shaped like my father's face. The truth was smaller and colder than that. We had simply been a transaction, a line item in someone else's ledger, no different from the shipping manifests I had spent 11 months learning to read. "I want to be there," I said. "When you find her." Severino studied me. "That is not a small request." "I am not asking as your maid," I said. "I am asking as someone who has spent 6 years learning exactly how to prove what she did in a way that will hold up to anyone who might later question it. You want Conti dead for what he ordered. I want Ferretti exposed for what she built, publicly, thoroughly, in a way that makes it impossible for the next family who hires her to pretend they didn't know what she was capable of." Something that might have been pride moved across his face. "You want justice delivered through paperwork." "I want justice delivered through the truth," I said. "Paperwork is simply the only language liars can't argue with once you've assembled enough of it." He agreed, though not without conditions. I would work alongside Enzo rather than alone, and I would not go near Ferretti directly until they had confirmed she was not, herself, under Conti's direct protection. I accepted the conditions because they were reasonable, and because some part of me, still raw from 6 years of solitary searching, was grateful not to be doing this alone anymore. It took 11 days to build the case properly. I cross-referenced Ferretti's authentication signatures against 3 separate incidents spanning 9 years, found the same subtle inconsistency in her forged documents each time. A particular way she overcorrected a signature's pressure at the terminal stroke, the tell of someone compensating for a hand that naturally wrote lighter than the forgery required. It was the kind of detail that would mean nothing to a jury and everything to another examiner. And I built the report as though I was writing it for the version of myself who had spent 4 years training to catch exactly this. Bianca, meanwhile, remained confined to the East Wing, and I found, to my own surprise, that I felt less anger toward her the longer the Ferretti investigation unfolded. She had been desperate and frightened, and had made an unforgivable choice inside that desperation, but she had not built the machine that killed my father. She had simply been another person the machine had used. I said as much to Severino one night, and he was quiet for a long moment before answering. "You're more generous than I am." "I'm not generous," I said. "I just know the difference between someone who builds a weapon and someone who picks one up because she was frightened enough to reach for the nearest thing in the room. It doesn't excuse what she did. It just means I'm not interested in destroying her the way I'm interested in destroying Ferretti." He reached across the desk and took my hand, turning it over to trace the old scar on my wrist with his thumb, a habit that had become, in the weeks since the study, less a question and more a kind of quiet punctuation between us. "When this is finished," he said, "I am ending the engagement publicly, not quietly, not in a way anyone can later pretend didn't happen." "That's not why I brought you the truth," I said. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I'm doing it." Raffaele Conti did not go quietly, which I suppose was never a realistic expectation for a man who had spent 14 months quietly dismantling another family's empire from the inside. He came for Severino directly, 3 weeks after Enzo returned from Lugano, in the kind of move that told me Conti had finally understood the Ferretti thread was unraveling and decided a desperate strike was preferable to a slow unmasking. Gunfire outside the estate's east gate at 2 a.m, 4 of Conti's men against Severino's night guard, and I woke to the sound of it with my heart already racing before my mind had finished catching up to what the sound meant. I did not hide. I want to be honest about that, because hiding was the old version of me, the 11-year-old who believed invisibility was safety, and that version of me had not survived the garage, or the study, or the 11 months of quiet arithmetic that had finally been believed. I went to the study instead, to the safe where Severino kept the physical originals of everything I had assembled against Ferretti and Conti both, because if the estate was under attack, that evidence was the one thing that could not be allowed to burn. Bianca found me there. Unguarded, in the chaos, whoever had been watching the east wing had abandoned the post to reinforce the gate, and she had used the opening to get free, though not, as I first feared, to run. "I know where the second set of copies is," she said, breathless, still in the plain clothes they'd given her in confinement instead of silk. Ferretti kept insurance, a backup file, in case Conti ever tried to cut her out the way he cut out everyone else eventually. I heard him mention it once before I understood what any of it meant. If Conti's men reach the study before Severino's do, they'll be looking for that backup, not for you. I stared at her, unable for a moment to reconcile the woman who had tried to have me killed with the woman standing in front of me offering information that might save the exact evidence that would destroy her own protection. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. "Because I'm not actually a monster," she said. "I was just frightened enough to act like one for a while, and because if Conti wins tonight, he has no more use for me than he ever had for you. I'd rather be the woman who helped stop him than the woman who's remembered only for helping start this." We moved the copies together, the two of us, through a service corridor I had memorized in my first month at the estate, and she had apparently learned during whatever version of confinement Enzo had actually enforced. We were not friends. We would likely never be friends. But we were, in that half hour, exactly what the situation required us to be. Two women who understood, in our very different ways, what it costs to survive inside a world built by dangerous men. The gunfire ended before dawn. Severino found me in the study 40 minutes after the last shot, still holding the case file against my chest like something that might otherwise float away, and the look on his face when he saw I was unhurt undid something in both of us that neither of us had words for yet. "Conti's dead," he said. "Two of his men are in custody. The other two ran, and they will not get far." He crossed the room and took the file gently out of my hands, setting it on the desk, freeing both of us to simply stand there, breathing, alive. "Bianca told Enzo where you were. She could have run in the chaos. She didn't." "She helped me move the evidence," I said. I think some part of her wanted to be believed too, at the end of it. I understand that particular hunger better than most people would. He was quiet for a long moment, his hand at the back of my neck, his forehead against mine the way it had been the first night we stopped pretending. "I am not going to pretend what she did doesn't have consequences," he said, "but I am not going to kill a woman who spent tonight helping save the truth either, no matter what she did before it." "That's not weakness," I said. "That's the same arithmetic you did for me in the garage. You just have to be willing to let the sum change when the evidence changes." "You taught me that," he said. "You were already capable of it," I said. "You just needed a reason to trust the math." Giulia Ferretti's backup file, once recovered, confirmed everything I had already built independently. A decade of forged authentications, sold to whichever family paid the highest price for a piece of paper that looked legitimate enough to survive scrutiny. My father's name was in it, alongside 11 others, families, and individuals across 3 countries who had lost everything to invoices built by a woman no one had ever thought to question, because questioning her was, in the industry's own words, questioning the very idea of trustworthy paperwork. Severino did not have her killed. That decision, I came to understand, was mine to make more than his, and I chose instead to do the thing I had spent 6 years training to do before grief redirected my whole life towards silver polish and quiet arithmetic. I built the case, properly, thoroughly, and handed it to a network of legitimate authorities across 3 jurisdictions who had spent years unable to prove what everyone quietly suspected. Ferretti's career ended in exposure and prosecution, not in blood, and for the first time since I was 11 years old, I felt the particular, complicated relief of watching justice arrive in the form my father would actually have recognized as justice. The truth, assembled carefully enough that no one could argue with it. Bianca Volterra did not marry Severino Valenti. That much had been decided the night I said her name in a garage full of cold water, though it took 2 more months for the announcement to become public, delayed by the practical necessity of managing the fallout from Conti's death and Ferretti's exposure without destabilizing 3 territories at once. When it finally came, Severino did exactly what he had promised, ended it publicly, without softening, without allowing anyone to later claim it had been a quiet, mutual decision rather than the direct consequence of a betrayal he had chosen, deliberately, to survive rather than bury. Bianca did not disappear into disgrace either. Her family's debts were restructured under terms Severino negotiated himself, terms that protected her from the very desperation that had driven her into Conti's arms in the first place, and she left the North entirely to build a life somewhere the Valenti name would not follow her into every room. I do not know if we will ever speak again. I know that I no longer wish her harm, and for a woman who once tried to have me killed, that is, I think, the most honest peace I am capable of offering. As for me, I did not go back to silver polish. Severino asked me, 3 months after the garage, to formally take over the estate's financial oversight, a position with a title and a salary, and none of the invisibility I had spent 3 years hiding inside. I said yes, not because the danger had disappeared, but because I had finally proven, to myself as much as to him, that the skill my father gave me was never meant to stay hidden in a coat lining forever. We were married in the spring, in a ceremony smaller than the one that had been planned for Bianca, in a garden behind the estate rather than the cathedral that had already printed invitations for a different bride. I wore my mother's ring, the one true inheritance I had carried out of Palermo alongside my real name, and when Severino slid it back onto my finger after the vows, he pressed his mouth to the old scar on my wrist and said quietly, "Only for me. I intend to spend the rest of my life being grateful you never learned how to stay invisible when it mattered most." I think about that night in the garage often. The cold water, the rope, the 3 words that could have ended everything and instead began it. I think about how close I came to staying silent, the way I had stayed silent for 3 years, the way silence had once felt like the only safety I could afford. It was not safety. It was simply the shape fear takes when you have not yet met someone worth the risk of speaking. I know the difference now. I knew it the moment I looked past Severino's shoulder at the woman in white, and finally, after 11 months of careful, patient, exhausting silence, let the truth out of my chest and into the cold garage air where it could finally do some good. 3 words. That was all it took. It is astonishing, looking back, how much of a life can turn on so few. Thank you for staying with Isolde all the way to the end of this one. If this story kept you up later than you meant to stay, that's exactly the kind of trouble I like to cause. So subscribe, ring the bell, and I'll see you in the next one, where the water is always a little colder and the truth always costs a little more.